years that, oops, we are now recording, okay? So I have not known them for the 37 years that they've had their Rock Valley Garden Center open. 37 years is a long time to be in any kind of business. And I did work in the greenhouse business for 8 or 9 years, and I know all that goes into that. And they're a premier garden center and have all kinds of offerings: bird feed, seed, plants, you name it, they got it over there. It's on Bell School Road in Rockford. Tonight with winter bird feeding, I'm going to guess that 99% of us on this call are feeding the birds this winter. It's a great way to get them up close so you can see them. And I'm even willing to bet that most of us probably grew up in a house where our parents fed the birds. And I know that's where I learned birds, from my parents looking out my window before I actually started going looking for them. And I know it helps to know what kind of seed brings certain birds in, what kind of feeders are available, and all the great things that you can do to get them come close to your house. So we're here to, and we can never not learn something. I'm sure of that, no matter how many years you've been feeding the birds. So I appreciate Dave and Cathy coming tonight and sharing their wisdom with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you two. Thank you much. Oh, one more thing. Questions. We're going to wait again to the end of the presentation for questions. If you have one and you're afraid you're going to forget it, put it in the chat and we'll go through all the chat questions. But if you're not one that likes to do the chat, you'll get your chance at the end of the presentation to still ask. We'll unmute you and you can ask your question then too. Okay, Dave, Cathy, thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm David. This is my lovely wife, Cathy. Glad to see you all. And we're going to break this talk down into a few segments. We're going to be covering feeder placement, types of feeders, types of food, water, how to keep the critters away from your feeders, and cleanliness around the feeding stations, and then also on the end, a Cornell Feeder Watch. So that's where we're going to start. Now, placement of feeders is that's the main important part. And the main thing you look at really is that you need to be able to see it and enjoy it. That's the critical thing. But to really get the real birds you want, there's certain things you got to learn. Starting out, a lot of times you'll see, driving around, people have a bird feeder station in the front yard. And usually that's because that's where their picture window is. It's where their living room is. And so they like to sit in the living room and watch the birds, but not always the best spot for a bird feeder. Other times they might just slap on a window feeder too, because they're sitting near the window and they want to be able to see it. Another aspect would be the back of the yard. Usually there you have a choice of a deck or a little farther out, some kind of a pole situation. Some people will hang them in trees, all kinds of things. But the main thing is to try it so you can see it and enjoy it. Now, a couple instances for myself. My mother lives in a nursing home now. She's on a single floor, and we were able to put up a bird feeding pole and station right outside her window so she can lay in her bed, look out and see the birds. Now, Cathy's mother, when she was alive, she lived over in Morningstar, but she was on a second story. And she was an avid birder, even more so than my mother was. And what we did was we got a telescoping pole and we were able to take a tube feeder and we'd hoist it up just so she could look out her window and see it. And we hung it up in the tree, even though it wasn't actually the best spot for a tree because the squirrels used to try and get at it. But she was able to sit and enjoy it. And so that was appreciated by her. Now, some of the areas you want to consider, I would say mainly like in your backyard, is that birds need cover. They can find your feeder, but they're going to find it more inviting if they got a place where they can run to, or I shouldn't say run to, but fly to quickly in case of dangers, predators they might sense. So shrubbery that you might have. We had a lot of customers come and say, well, yeah, in the springtime, they want to buy some shrubs. Well, they want to, what are you going to do with it? they say, well, we're going to landscape around the bottom of the bird feeder pole stand, which is not good because there again, the birds can sense it's not a safe spot because there might be predators down below. So there's certain things you got to consider that way. So having cover nearby, but not real close to the bird feeder will help make your feeding station a little bit more inviting. Another thing would be to make sure your area in the backyard, maybe you got an established yard, you got lots of landscape, which is good. But if you're just starting out, think about planting things that might keep the wildlife, so to speak, or the birds in your area. Some it could be fruiting trees, trees that have a lot of cover brush. Yeah, I recognize some of these. These are really good ones. This is a blue spruce, and a blue spruce can offer a lot of cover. Here on the property, we do have a lot of blue jays, and that's where they go to. They go into and cardinals. They'll hide in the blue spruce, and then when they get ready to feed, they come out and they run right back to it. Another one are arborvitae or cedar. There again, they can get in and out quickly and be protected from predators that might arise. White pine's another one. Sometimes too, you got to worry about like hawks. We have a lot of customers that will come in and say, well, my feeder's out in the open, and all of a sudden they'll look out and they'll see like a dive bomber coming down, and all of a sudden the birds fly away, and the ones that don't have a place to hide, well, those are the ones that are going to get hit. And those, a lot of people complain about hawks coming to their feeder. Well, it's part of nature, but you can help by creating spaces for them to hide. And at the same time, once they come to your feeder, they can eat, but then quickly grab the seed on these cold, blowy days. Well, they're going to run to a shrub or a tree and sit there and enjoy their meal. So that's a good point to do that. Now, birds, they can stand, and you see them sometimes standing on the edge of a feeder, and you wonder, how they do that. But their feathers, the way they are, and their feet, they don't really feel the cold up to a point. And of course, that is why they're feeding. They need to get that energy going in their body to stay warm. So.
Yes, in winter, also, if you could place your feeder somewhere out of the harsh north and west winds, that really helps the birds. If they're standing there, and if you're noticing that there's a big snowstorm and the feeder's filling up with snow, that's another sign that it's probably uncomfortable for the bird that way too. So if you can put the feeder in a more sheltered position away from the winter winds, that's much more agreeable for them. Also, when it's really cold in winter, you can get these little roosting pockets, and multiple birds, a couple birds will go in there and stay warm when there's a bad storm, and have nice roosting boxes. And the difference between the winter roost is most of the houses, the hole will be up here, but a winter roost, they'll put the hole down at the bottom because, of course, inside heat rises. And so the birds can stay a little warmer from the cold winter winds in these roosting boxes. Some people leave up their bird feeder or bird houses, and then the birds can use that to stay safe from the cold winter weather. But just remember to clean those out early spring, so you have more birds in there.
I guess the main takeaway from this is look at the location where you're putting your bird feeder. Sometimes you don't have very many choices, but if you do, try and make it so the bird is comfortable. Make sure that the bird is not going to be scared of predators, cats, for one thing, just so they got some cover to get to once they get their food and get away quickly. And you'll find that you'll get more birds to your feeder if it's set up that way. And so we're going to start covering a lot of feeders that we have and tell a little bit about them. We get a lot of people come in, they say, we just want a bird feeder. And so we try and find out, again, what their habitat is in their backyard or where they want to place it, because it'll determine where you're going to put it. These are what you call a hopper feeder. And usually these are a little bit heavier. A lot of times, the better ones are made out of wood. They'll use cedar wood because it doesn't rot. It'll turn gray over time, but they'll last much longer. We have a lot of elder gentlemen that like to do crafting, and they don't know much about bird feeding. The first thing you want to do is make them out of plywood or pine wood. I mean, it's cheaper and it's easy to make, but they don't last more than half a season usually. And things you want to look for in a good feeder is, you see it on here, they use screws instead of nails or staples. They will break out, they will pop up, they'll swell. So squirrel or screws are most important. And then also, if you can see the thickness of the wood, usually 3/4 inch are best. It makes it a little bit heavier, so you got to think about where you're going to be putting this. Are you going to mount it to a post, or are you going to hang it in off of a shepherd's hook or whatever? But you got to figure a hopper feeder, they're going to hold a substantial amount of seed. Some of the other aspects are the drainage. They're a little bit more open, but if you notice on a lot of them, the better ones will have screen on the bottom. So any moisture that would get into the seed has an opportunity to drain out. That's the worst thing in feeders is wet seed and it doesn't dry out. And that's when you start getting that, you've all seen it. And the other thing I like about hopper feeders is the amount they can hold. There's also a lot of times, I don't know if you see, this is hinged. A lot of people like the hinge because it's easier to fill. Sometimes you'll find them without the hinge because some people think, well, that gets all iced up. How am I going to open it up? So there's drawbacks. A lot of times you'll find a feeder where you raise the whole roof on the string, but there again, that can be very cumbersome. When you're out there, I'm sure all of you had to go out there, fill your feeder when it's 20 degrees and the wind's blowing. And you don't want your birds to suffer, so you go out there, but it's really hard to fill your feeder. And some other little things they do, they put a little notch on the side, so in case your feeder is mounted and you're viewing it from this side, you can still see the birds. The overhang as well, a lot of times on wooden feeders, we see that a lot where you got guys making their own feeders and they don't really analyze it very well, but sometimes the roof line is in too far, so then the bird is getting wet. The other thing is they'll make it, the roof will overhang too much. And at the same time, as a lot of the birds being a little on the skittish side, they won't want to approach it because they feel they can't get in and out fast enough. So that's what we call a hopper feeder.
Really big hoppers too, if you don't want to trudge out in the winter snow. There's some that hold quite a bit of seed.
This is another one. Again, it's made out of all cedar, and this is what they call a fly-through. Fly-through is if you have problems getting birds or you don't care what you get for a bird, fly-throughs are very nice because they're so open, you'll get everything and anything in there. Some of the drawbacks would be a lot of wind can get in there, snow blowing in, and so there's a few drawbacks to that. There again, you want to look for ones that have the screen on the bottom. But again, usually if they got somebody, especially if they got kids and they want bird activity, they don't care what they're getting, fly through is almost a no-brainer. Then you got the birds that are what we consider ground feeders, the mourning doves, cardinals, chickadees. Those birds will also go up on feeders, but a lot of them are basically ground feeders. So some people just take the seed, cast it on the ground. Well, in the wintertime, it's hard to do that. You bury the seed for them. So putting it on a platform, they can get at it. But then again, you still have squirrels, the rabbits, chipmunks, everything else can get into it. So if you don't mind feeding the whole neighborhood, the ground feeder is a good option.
Over the years, I can remember days when mourning doves would only feed on the ground. But being in the business here for so long, we're starting to see that the birds are adapting and they're realizing the good fresh food is up in that feeder. And if you've got a feeder that's got enough distance between the roof line and where they can land, I've seen mourning doves all over hopper feeders.
This one here, we got quite a selection of feeders, but this one here, this is a peanut feeder.
Peanuts in the shell.
Yeah, for peanuts in the shell. Woodpeckers, blue jays. It holds a lot of peanuts, so you get a lot of good activity. There again, the cedar feeders are nice because like woodpeckers, you got that clinging ability. Nuthatches, all those kind of birds that like to cling, they like the feel of the wood and their claws can really sink into it. And this is like another variation on that peanut feeder. But here again, they're able to pick out the peanuts or crack it open and pick out the pieces.
We have customers that have said the blue jays are so smart, they will take a few peanuts, see them in these feeders, and they'll choose which one weighs the most and then fly off with that peanut in the shell. They want the biggest bang for their buck. And peanuts are a great high energy food for winter. So it's really important to give them that energy that they need when the weather's so cold. David mentioned earlier window feeders, which are a nice way to bring the birds extremely close. We always recommend to start with a clean window and then just a small little drop of oil on the suction cups. If you were using water, it would freeze and thaw during the winter and the feeder would fall easily. So a little bit of oil and they stay nicely stuck, and then you can enjoy the birds extremely up close. Well, Dave was showing you some of the wooden feeders, which a lot of birds like the wooden feeders because they can grab hold as they're landing on it, and they feel like they're getting in their claws into the wood, so to speak. But there is a lot of recycled feeders out in available for people, and the advantage of the recycled is they're really, really easy to clean. So you will have no problems with scraping the wood and this and that. It comes off really quickly. And so that's an advantage for keeping the birds healthy. I like on all the different hopper feeders, the distance between the roof and where they're landing, if that's nice and open, then you'll get all different sizes of birds that are attracted to it. So advantage for recycle is easy to clean. Also easy to clean, we've got a line by the Droll Yankee Company. It's a tube feeder. Some of the smaller birds will use the perches. Some of the bigger birds would probably be more inclined if you added a tray to the bottom. This particular company, they've got perches that go around in a half circle. They've done this because some birds, like a cardinal, like to sit and eat head on, and some birds would sit on the side and turn their heads to get the food. So this would help both types of species to get their food at the way they like best. And the bottom of this feeder is really easy. Just one little turn and the whole bottom comes out. So it's a very easy feeder to clean, and cleanliness is really important with all species. So we like that feeder. Some people are wanting to feed just the small birds that can cling. So this is a little tiny mesh ball that you can add black oil sunflower or peanut halves. Good high energy food that'll help the birds in the winter. And it usually keeps the bigger birds that can't hang upside down from getting to that. Somebody was also saying they didn't like all the sparrows that were inundating their feeders. The sparrows would have a difficult time on this one, so you could leave that.
I was going to bring up another point on the tube feeder. We have tube feeders that can be almost 3 feet long, lots of perches. If you're feeding the finches, a lot of times they come in flocks. And so the more perching area you have, the more inviting your station would be. But you can get them for, especially if you don't have a heavy thing to hang it on. Tube feeders come with maybe just 2 perches. Some have like this one here. You got 4 stations, but some might have up to 16 stations, which can be very fun to watch.
And types of food for winter bird feeding. I think number one we would recommend, especially if there's snow covered, is to put a little grit, just a handful of the grit, so that the birds are able to digest their food. They usually pick this up from the streets, with a little bit of gravel here and there. But when there's snow covered, they can't get that, and they need this to digest their food.
Or salt, or the bad thing is salt that they pick up.
On the side. Some people will offer a little handful right in their feeder. Some people put a little dish out somewhere separate. But that's really important in the winter time. Another really important food for winter is black oil sunflower seed. It's very high in oil content, so that's a really good energy boost for the birds when they need it in that cold weather. The black oil is a little bit softer shell. It's a little easier to handle for the smaller songbirds. The striped sunflower is a little bit larger shell, a little harder shell to crack, and sometimes the cardinals will like to condition their beaks by cracking open those bigger seeds on the stripe. But I know cardinals love the black oil too, and with the winter feeding, something with a little higher energy content is probably a little more advisable. This, out of all the seed, this is most birds' favorite, is the sunflower. We do sell sunflower where they took it out of the shell, so it's just the meat. You wouldn't have the shells on the ground. And some birds prefer to get in and out, grab their food really quick and escape with that meat somewhere else. So they feel a little safer that way.
I was going to make a little side comment about, we get a lot of people questioning or asking about birdseed prices lately. And some of it is weather related because of the harvest, maybe wasn't as good. A lot of it is in trucking. Our main distributor, or the one that blends our own brand, they can't get enough trucks to go out west to get the seed that they need to manufacture our blend. And even if they do, the freight rate has gone, well, I think most of you all know that freight is horrendous now. But there are some problems with some of the seed volumes that are available at this time. But it's all kind of something we haven't seen for a long, long time. So hopefully things will start to level off here pretty soon.
Another option is these seed cylinders. They are seed, and it's like a hard cake. The advantage to this is a lot of people complain that when the birds are in your bird feeder, they're kicking all the seed out and it's ending up on the ground. Well, on a cylinder like this, a hard cake, they would need to just pick out what they want. They can't kick it all over the place. So this is really attractive, and they come in all different like blends. There's some with nuts for woodpeckers, and there's some with just regular mix. So they're a real nice way to feed the birds. Some people come in and are unable to get a squirrel from staying off of their bird feeder. Some people are not able to do a baffle, that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the white safflower seed is a seed that's loved by cardinals, but not by squirrels. I might say that maybe 2% of the customers I've had a squirrel that actually ate this. So it's not their favorite, but if they're desperate, they probably try some. All right, I guess, and then one of the most important foods for winter bird feeding would be suet, something with that real high energy content. And there is a number of products that are geared towards that. You can buy little tiny suet nuggets, and you could offer them separate in a separate feeder, or you can mix them in with your regular feeder. High energy, especially peanuts. Peanuts in the winter or peanut butter related suets are really good for the birds in the winter. They make suet in all different forms. They hollowed out a little log, and then they made these little cylinders that you could just plug right into there. And the woodpeckers love this. It's just all natural wood, and they can cling all over to it. And again, the suet is so important as a winter food. This type of a feeder fills, you can put your suet cake inside, but the woodpeckers really like to prop their tails when they're eating. So if you offer a feeder with this elongated board underneath, that's for them to prop their tails up on that. They like. Some people complain about grackles and getting at the suet feeder. They've come up with upside down suet feeders. So the cake is hung like this, and the birds themselves, those larger birds, can't cling and hang upside down. And so this allows just the clinging birds to be able to get their high energy winter treat. And more different suet shapes and little balls. And so this feeder, the balls they would fall down to the area that the birds can cling to and eat, and then they're protected from the weather up on the top by not being exposed. So suet is very important for winter, and there's a number of ways you can offer it to the birds.
A lot of the suet also, the way they render it, it won't get rancid. So it's important. Sometimes people go to the butcher, used to do that and make their own suet balls. Well, you can do that, but you gotta be sure that when you do that, that they consume it, use it up right away. Don't let it sit in a feeder or on a board or something like that for any length of time. Okay.
The other couple people want feeders that the squirrels can't get to, because the squirrels can consume a lot of seed. And so there's a couple of squirrel proof options. This one is all metal, and they have a hard time chewing through it. I'm not saying the squirrel hasn't chewed through metal screening before, but this really would slow them down. But the weight of the squirrel shuts off the feeding area so that he can't get to the food, and then it's all encased in metal. But the weight of the bird is light enough where they can just stay there and eat away. There's another feeder that's been around for many years. It's called the Absolute. And this was designed by a gentleman in Cherry Valley. And he designed this so that the seed would shut off like this when the weight of the squirrel would land on it. It has a weight bar in the back. And then I did have a funny story where the customer said she had 2 squirrels that tag teamed. So one would sit back here on the weight bar while the other one sat and ate his fill. And then they switched places. So the squirrels are pretty tricky. So they don't usually get in there.
Well, I think we're going to touch a little bit about water. And water is almost more for inviting birds to your backyard feeding station. If you got water and your neighbor doesn't, the birds are going to be in your yard and not in your neighbor's. They need water just like we do. We can go without food for a while, but you can't go without water for very long. And birds are no different. And during the winter time, it's a little bit more difficult. You have birds that can maybe, well, they say, well, they can eat the snow and all that. Well, the same as us, and for survival, if we go out and we're out there stranded and we eat snow, well, we're going to survive a little bit, but it's going to lower your body temperature, your core. And the same thing happens to the birds. So we try and supply them with fresh water that is not frozen. And ways of doing that is if you have a container, there's a lot of heated bird baths out there. You can either have an insert that goes into a pan or something like that. That'll work, or else a regular bird bath. Something like this, where they got the thermostat, they're all thermostat controlled. So in case Fido comes along and knocks it over and it won't keep running, they're made so that they'll shut off. And then they won't run continually either, only when a certain temperature is reached. And it's very important. And even though you got water out there, make sure it's during the summer, of course, it evaporates, but during the winter time, it won't evaporate as much, but it can. So try and keep the water levels up, even if it means having to go out there with some warm water to start and warm it up. But be careful on the water you're using. I'm not a big fan of drinking city water. There's a lot of chlorides, fluorides, and everything else in it. And birds are no different than humans, so it's not always the best to drink. So if you are using your tap water to fill it, do like you do with your house plants. Put it in a bigger jug of water and let those things gas out. Overall, healthier birds will probably be better. And not that they'll thank you, but I think they'll be appreciated. And the other thing is whenever you have water sources, you'll get squirrels, everything else will come there. So that's why I kind of make sure you wash it, keep it clean. There again, for overall health of the bird.
I've had quite a few customers in the last few years that have said that they had bluebirds and robins stay the entire winter, and they were always at that heated bird bath, getting the fresh water that allowed them to stay for the whole season. So fresh water in the winter is a huge draw.
Now, a lot of people have accused us of letting squirrels out in their neighborhood. But we don't do that. It's just part of nature. And squirrels love birdseed. They love the sunflower. They love the suet. And so if you don't mind putting up with them, we tell a lot of people, well, you're not going to get totally rid of them. You can either use devices to keep them off your feeders, or even set up another little, like a ground feeder for them, little ways for your feeding station. Although they say, well, they do that, but they come over to the bird feeder because what they're offering in the bird feeder is better than what they were putting on the little cob of corn in the corner for the squirrel. So there's a few devices, whether you have like a pole setup, or a shepherd's hook. One thing we do recommend is try and keep it away. A squirrel can jump pretty far, and not so much upward, but they can come downward from the top of a roof ledge, off tree limb, your deck railing. So there's certain devices that you can use to try and stop them. But I'm sure maybe you've all seen the little YouTube videos of the squirrels doing all their acrobatics and things they do to get to a feeder, and they're hilarious. But she has some devices here.
So on the baffles, you can put a baffle if you have a feeder on the top of a pole. We recommend about 14 feet clearance completely around that pole so that it's freestanding and the squirrel can't jump off of anything that's like a tree limb, what Dave said, deck railings, anything like that. The baffles, you want to get those up off the ground at least 4 feet, because the squirrels can go straight up and bypass it if this isn't up right underneath the feeder. This particular baffle has a split so that people that have shepherd's hooks, you can't take the stovepipe one and go up around the hook and down. So this one opens up and then you can just wrap it around. They give you the hardware to clamp onto your shepherd's hook. Other critters that do a lot of damage are raccoons, and they've been known to destroy feeders, completely destroy. So they have made a raccoon baffle, so it's probably 2 to 3 times longer than a regular squirrel baffle. They made this one particularly wide because the raccoon, when he spreads his front arms out, he can't get it all the way around. This is too wide for him and his short little arms. He can't go up it. So again, you need to place that pole away from anything the raccoon can jump off, and put one of these baffles on, and you're in business. I've had a number of people with suet feeders, and the raccoon, they've got it like wired to the tree, and they figure it out, and it ends up in the woods somewhere, and they never see it again. So some people bring their feeders in at night because the raccoons are such a problem. But if you had a station with a baffle like this, you are set. They can't do anything about that.
One thing we want to touch on is with all these feeders, and the more bird activity you get, they're going to use up the seed. And then you fill it up again, then you use it up. And then it rains maybe one time or snow gets on it. Pretty soon you're going to start seeing crust forming down in the bottom. Pretty soon the seed isn't even coming out of the ports. You wonder why the birds aren't eating it. Well, you're finding out it's starting to fill up. The water can't drain out. This is specifically in a lot of the tube feeders. And you just got to realize most of these seeds are very oily. They're very greasy. And so what will happen is get dirty, just like your turkey pan was on Thanksgiving Day. You got to clean them. And to do that, warm soapy water, use a mild dish detergent. We have a station in the back that we offer a service to our customers if they want, where we'll hose it down real good, take a brush to it. You got wood hopper feeders, you can use a little stiffer brush, but a lot of the plastic ones, you gotta be careful because you don't want to scratch and mar the tube itself. Some people will use a little bit of bleach water. There's all kinds of recipes from 1 to 9 ratio bleach to water, but usually warm soapy water will take care of it. And if you do it on a regular basis and then let it thoroughly dry before you put it out again. Sometimes take a hair dryer to it. You don't want to be putting fresh seed into a newly cleaned feeder, but it's all wet down below, and now you're already starting off with a bad feeder. And birds can tell. We get in seed every week. We get it by the ton load, and we get it made for us. And we found if you don't have fresh seed, especially let's say for this Niger thistle seed, the birds can sense if there's a mold or a fungus on it, and they won't eat it. It'll look just like the other seed. And so a lot of times you look at the seed, you want to make sure it's kind of nice and shiny, not real dusty and dirty. Because the birds can sense that, and you wonder why your seed isn't going down. Well, a lot of times it's old, stale seed. A lot of it all has to do with cleaning, and it can be a chore, but again, it's for the better health of the birds, and also you just get increased bird activity.
David mentioned that, every couple of weeks you should clean your feeder in the summer. Of course, if you have a lot more activity, you might need to clean it a little more often. And if you're thinking in the winter, oh, it's so cold, there wouldn't be a lot of disease and molds growing, but it's true that you need to clean them just about as often in the winter as you would in the summer. And again, depending on how many birds are using it at the time.
This summer too, we had something they call it the mysterious illness for birds, that birds were dying. They started out on the East Coast and it worked its way this way. They said like they found birds were getting disoriented, couldn't fly right. There's crustacean stuff forming on their eyelids. And they were thinking it was kind of like chronic wasting disease for deer, where all of a sudden they don't want anybody feeding the birds because they congregate together, and just like you don't want feeding deer at a trough, you worry about that chronic wasting disease. Well, that could be true. They've never really figured out what it was, but from the reports, only reports I found, that everybody knows anything different, I'd like to know. They thought they related it to when the cicadas came out, and they were thinking that there was a fungus in the soil that the cicadas were on or in as they went through the process of coming out of the ground, because it happened pretty much around the same time. And then the birds that would eat or be near the cicadas picked up this fungus, and it was causing the problem. But it was never really, it never came out, the scientists never came out and said this is exactly what it was. But if anybody would knows for a fact, I'd like to know. It was interesting, but luckily it didn't spread, it just kind of dissipated.
Keeping your feeders clean definitely will help the birds stay healthy. And we did want to mention the Cornell Feeder Watch. There's a link, it's feederwatch.org. You can choose a place to watch the birds from mid-November through the end of April of 2022. They're asking if you would choose 2 consecutive days to watch the birds. You can choose any amount of time you'd like to watch the birds. If you only have an hour or so in the morning before you head off to work, that would be fine. They want you to count the birds that you're pretty sure you can identify. It gets a little tricky when you get into all the different sparrows if you don't know all your birds. So count the birds you can identify. They want you to kind of count the birds that are at your feeders instead of, like, well, I saw a flock of geese go overhead. They said, don't worry about that. Just concentrate on what's coming to your feeder. And then you can report your data at feederwatch.org. They said, even if it's a day when, there's not very many birds coming, they really want that data. It's very helpful to them to get data from all times. Of course, after snow, your feeder's going to be very busy. You're like, I've got a lot of data here. But even the times when there's not as many birds visiting, they would like to know what's there. It helps a lot. They have a lot of great resources to help you identify birds at their feederwatch.org. They have little mini posters you can print out, common backyard birds, some hawks, some hummingbirds, and all that. So if you'd like to help, be a citizen scientist, go to feederwatch.org and help Cornell.
Well, that's about all we have for you tonight. Again, I want to congratulate your organization. I was looking at the newsletter. I mentioned this at the start of this before, and you're very active, and it looks like you got a very strong group. A lot of groups that I deal with are starting to falter. There's no passing on the guard to anybody, and then it's just not. You need people to be participants. Without participating, you won't have an organization, and it looks like right now you guys got a very strong one, so that's good. I'd like to see that.
Thank you, Dave and Cathy, for your comments just now, but also for a great presentation. Very informative. We have 2 questions in the chat, and then we'll unmute people just to see if somebody has a question that they'd like to ask and not in the chat. And the book we did, John, I'm not going to pronounce your last name, but you had 36 was your number, 37 was the name or the number for the book. So either type me your address, or my email is rivermiller@hotmail.com. If you want to email me your address, I'll get you that book. So the question, which I think you covered pretty well, how do you keep the squirrels away? The perennial question. And I don't know if there's any little other tidbit that you want to add to it, but I think you covered it well with feeders and feeder space and so forth. So maybe when we unmute people, maybe there'll be somebody else that can chime in there for us too. The other question is, how do the corn grits help birds digest their food?
Oh, the grit?
The grit.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's in their crop. It's, or kind of, they call it the gizzard. And it just grinds, kind of grinds the seed or the food up.
It's like chickens. You have to give chickens the same grit. And birds have that same type of a digestive system. And they can't get to it when they're snow covered. So it's critical for them.
Yeah, they
So
just don't get a, they just don't get a piece of peanut or a sunflower meat and just swallow it, you know.
So is it a corn grit or is it just, is it like?
Well, it's granite.
Oh,
We
okay.
use,
So it's,
use a granite grit,
okay.
but they'll,
Yeah, because you usually see some of the winter birds on the sides of the roads grabbing gravel that way for their gullet. So great idea.
we
very
also
good.
use-
Gary, can you unmute people just to see if somebody has another question? And again, can't thank you enough, Dave and Kathy, for your knowledge and taking the time to talk to our group. We'll see what we have here.
I don't know if I'm assuming anyone can unmute themselves, but
Thought he had the power of mute.
I'm just looking to see if I have to ask people to unmute or not.
Looks like most people are.
Hi,
hello,
hi, this is Pam. I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, and I may have missed this at the beginning, but do you recommend providing mealworm, dried mealworms for the bluebirds throughout the winter?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
We do sell live mealworms spring, summer, and fall. But in winter, we just offer the dried mealworms, and they will eat them, and they are a super high energy snack. So it's excellent thing to add to your bird's diet.
woodpeckers and nuthatches love them.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yes, can you hear me? It's Molly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, Molly.
Hi. Do you sell one of those cakes that has hot peppers in it, which the squirrels don't like? I found that very handy last year because I'm gone here and there and I can't be consistent about filling a bird feeder. So do you sell them at your place?
No, we do not.
I know it deters the squirrels and the mammals.
Yeah, I'm not sure about, it's kind of like us, eating a lot of hot stuff. I'm not sure if it, I don't know the science behind it, but I'm not sure if it'd be good for in the gullet of a bird or not, if it digest well. So that's why we just stay away from it.
Yeah, I don't know either. They just said that the birds are not affected by the hot peppers.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Molly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Again, the garden center is located right on Bell School Road, so it's a pretty easy bypass. 20 folks coming from Freeport or that area to get off on State, right?
Yeah.
And then head north on Bell School, and it's right there. A large array of feeders and seed and all kinds of other good stuff.
What is the name of your shop?
It's Rock Valley Garden Center.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Recommend the
It is
website.
listed in the newsletter, Molly, underneath
Okay.
their program.
What was
Okay.
the address again? What's the
We're
address?
at 785 North Bell School Road.
Ike's.
We are open year.
85.
We're open year round, except for a few holidays.
Right, well, seeing no more questions showing up in the chat. I'll give it another 20 seconds. Here's your last chance. You don't have any, you don't sell any of those squirrel launchers, do you? Like you see on some
We
of those
do.
YouTube videos? Oh, do you?
Oh,
Yeah.
not, we have bungee cords,
Well, I've seen them
No,
with the springs where they just, they jump on and,
but not the launcher.
we've got a feeder that's rechargeable battery, so if a squirrel lands on it, it spins and throws them off.
okay.
But
Throw Yankee
throw
line,
Yankee.
you got the flipper and the
Flipper
tipper.
and the whipper.
So a question just landed. How long can you keep purchased seed?
I would say Niger thistle is the one seed that goes stale the quickest. I'd say only buy what you can use in about 6 weeks.
Okay,
If you can keep it in a climate controlled, non-humid area, that would help maybe a little bit on the longevity. In the summer, we recommend a lot of times to just order smaller quantities instead of buying big bags of birdseed and storing them in the garage where it's so hot. A lot of times when they're harvesting those seeds, that you might get a little insect egg in the seed mix, and then the heat of the summer will make that.
We see the moth. a lot of
Yeah,
times
you'll get
moths.
moths and things. That, so you just want to buy smaller quantities in the summer and the heat. If you're storing it in your garage, we of course recommend a metal garbage can so critters can't get into it.
And also on a metal can, put some wood spacers under it because it can still, that metal condensation can draw moisture. Next thing you know, in the bottom of the can inside, if there's a lot of humidity, you're gonna get moisture in the can. A lot of times people don't clean that can out. And that's the other thing too. On the lid of a metal can, there's those little lips. And you gotta really clean those good because that's where a moth will lay their eggs. Next thing you know, you got moths all over the place. Even though the birds would probably love to eat it, you don't want it in your garage that way.
right.
The Suets, it used to be where you'd only have the suet in the winter, but they have formulated summer year round without any rancidness. So Suet's
And
That's
non-dripping. They don't
quite a-
drip either.
a long time. Some of the oilier seeds like Safflower, that one's got good longevity. Again, I guess it depends on the summer heat versus winter storage where it's nice and cool.
Right. Okay, well, good. Well, we appreciate you folks. Thanks for spending time with us. Like I say, I'm going to shut the recording off here quick. That will be available on our website.